Hi, my name is Mike Appleby, and today I'm going to be talking about IIIF tagging and discovery. As you heard earlier today, the IIIF presentation API pretty heavily leverages the open annotation data model to associate images with IIIF canvases. In addition, as you've seen, tools such as Mirador allow users, faculty, curators, students, to create annotations. And I'd like to show you one approach to managing these annotations. In this case, annotations made by Yale faculty and graduate students. At Yale, we have a cluster of research projects that really rely very heavily on IIIF. The three main projects or areas of focus are an addition of Gracians to Kratom, so basically collating manuscripts and creating a critical edition of a text. The second project is creating English literature. This is an interpretation of data produced by the hyperspectral imaging of inks and pigments used in Middle English manuscripts. And then finally, a literary history of the English Book of Hours, which is a study of variations in textual and visual elements in copies of books and hours that were either produced in England or produced for the export market for export to England. There's actually a fourth research team involved in this that's focusing on the books of hours, and this research team is composed of computer scientists, and they are doing research on applying computer vision techniques to segment manuscript pages, basically to identify features of interest in the manuscript pages automatically, algorithmically. So that team consists of a faculty member and some postdoctoral research assistants. So just to give you an idea of as these faculty are using Mirador, give you an idea of what they're looking at and what they're annotating. So for the critical edition of Gracians to Kratom, the graduate students and faculty member are moving through the texts, they're collating the various witnesses, and establishing a text a final text of the De Kratom. As the students are doing this work, of course, they're going through paragraph by paragraph, section by section, and so what they're doing is they're annotating each manuscript with the chapter numbers, basically, the modern divisions of the text as they move through. Essentially, they're establishing a table of contents through annotation as they do their work. They can also, of course, annotate anything they don't understand. So if they see a scribble in the margin and they're not sure what it is, they'll put a note in and come back to it later. The team that's looking at the history of construction of these manuscripts of English texts, they're really interested in codicological features. So they're interested in changes in ink color and in handwriting on these sort of marginal annotations and anything that's unusual. They're also interested in the use of color in things like the initials that you see at the right of the screen. The research group that's focusing on books of hours, they're interested in the text and its relationship to the visual within the manuscript. And so they're looking at these larger illustrations that you see at left, or these inhabited initials, or even the line fillers that you see at the bottom right there. And the computer science folks have a less visually interesting output. But what they've done here with their algorithm is they've actually identified the main text block out of a page, and their algorithm can do this regardless of whether the page is kind of devoid of decoration or has very highly decorated borders, and then has determined the line height of each line and gone through and drawn bounding boxes around each line. This is a precursor to further work they've done, which is, of course, determining where there are images or non-text content within the text body. And this then gets you to eventually identifying pages that might have litanies or poetry or non-standard layout or a layout that indicates a certain type of material on the page. The goal of this is basically to get to the point where you could run this algorithm across tens of thousands of pages and get a rough idea of where certain types of content are within the corpus without having to page through it yourself. I'd also say that these bounding boxes could be very helpful as transcription targets. So all of this work can lead to interesting problems when you take annotations that were made by disparate research projects and you want to have a sort of database of them, you want to have them accessible, but they're very different types of output. Some projects produce a relatively small number of annotations that have a lot of description, notes that they've typed in, and have basically take a lot of time per annotation. Whereas the computer scientists work on their algorithm for a few months and then they point it at something and it spits out 100,000 annotations and they land in the pile along with everything else. And we also have multiple projects working on the same texts. So the computer scientists are working across all of the texts that we have available in this set of research projects. So we need to be able to sort of filter their results out when they're not meaningful or important. So our answer to this has been to develop an annotation search engine using Blacklight. And for those of you who are not familiar with Blacklight, it's open source software. It's written in Ruby on Rails. And it's often used as a front end for library catalogs or for digital collections. So, and it provides two types of search. It can provide full text search across whatever you feed into it. And it can also provide a faceted search. So you see the set of categories on the left that will let you drill down into the content. So when we looked at this, we thought, well, we like faceted search, but we need to drive those facets. So we need to come up with what our categories are for our research projects and somehow associate the data with those categories. And we thought about looking around for existing controlled vocabularies, but we weren't sure what we were really going to tag. And so our solution was to tell the graduate students to use Twitter-style hashtags. And basically, they established a very simple set of tags at first and increased it over time. So you can see image, Labor July, Leo, and on the right, image, it's in text block, and Margaret, right? So these are great for shorthand, and we have autocomplete and so forth that we built in to assist them so that when they create a tag, if they go to reuse it, they use the same tag over again. But as far as human readability, this is very terse. So what we did is we built another piece of software that I'm not going to put up on the screen, but it essentially is a simple mapping database that maps the tags to a location in the hierarchy of the faceted search. So basically when they enter an annotation or when we reindex the annotations, every time we see Margaret, we associate that image with that particular facet. And that lets us drive an interface like this, where we can come in and we can say, well, I'm looking for a particular subject. I expand that. I see, oh, we have figures as a subcategory. And then I see Margaret. I click on that, and my 7 results come up on the screen. So what you're looking at here are all of the annotation targets. And I think the most critical thing here is what we're seeing is actually just the annotation area, right? We're using the image API to request just the pixels that were surrounded by the bounding box when they drew the annotation. We don't have to bring in the whole folio image and make the person guess at what area was of interest when the annotation was made. And we're also showing a little bit of other metadata here as well. Now, pretend I was to click on that lower right image because I found that one interesting, that Oxford Bodleian example, and I would get a detail view. So I'd just like to break this down a little because I think it's kind of illustrative of the power of IIIF and having these open APIs and all the images and the metadata at your fingertips. Very little of this is actually from the annotation itself. So if you see, I highlighted the annotation information up there, which is basically these hashtags, and an attribution of the annotation to the person who created it. And of course, the bounding box of the annotation area is from the annotation. But that's it for the annotation. Now, when we index the annotation, we go out and we say, well, this annotation was made on a canvas. Well, we go grab the canvas, and what do we find from the canvas? Well, we find a label, right? We find the folio label, which is 54 verso. And we also have the reference to the full folio image that's associated with the canvas. So we can now show a thumbnail of that, right? So you have some context for where this annotation is on the page. The rest of the information here that you see on the right is drawn from the manifest. So we go out and we get the manifest. It doesn't need to be a manifest at Yale. It can be a manifest at Oxford or at Stanford or somewhere else. And we extract the rest of the information that we need to build this display, including the name of the manuscript, the metadata field, which again is name value pairs that the institution that creates the manifests can dictate. They decide what goes there. We also have a related item, which is basically a link to the, in this case, it's a link to the Bodleian catalog entry, and that was included in the manifest. And at the bottom right, we could have rights, logo, and attribution data. So this gives an example, I think, of how you can build a fairly compelling search interface using IIIF APIs, using the image API, using the presentation API, around your annotation data that you've collected and that you're aggregating in your own search interface. A couple things to take away from this. One is this idea, I think, about control. You know, you're making available your images for reuse. You're making available your metadata. In a way, it might feel like you're giving up some control. What are people going to do with this? But on the other hand, because you're giving it out in using these APIs that are standard, it's very easy for a user interface designer to pick up what you would want to have displayed, which is probably your metadata, your attribution, institutional logo, and so forth, and get that up on the screen without much effort. The second thing I would like to say is that the annotations are lightweight. It's very easy to build an interface like this and to tailor it to your community, whether it's curators, whether it's medievalists, as in the case at Yale, or other scholarly communities, or no doubt public if you're building an interface to crowdsourced annotations. So that's all. This is the team at Yale who are working on the project. So thank you.